We are in Romans, the 12th chapter, and we're approaching the backside of this book here, aren't we? We're getting towards the end of it. And last week we dealt with chapter 12, 1 through 8, and we noted that the end of chapter 11 ends the doctrinal aspect of the book. So at this point, Paul says, well, because of all these things, I'm mindful of the 8th chapter of this book where Paul says, all things work together for those who love God. I'll read it rather than quoting it poorly. It's Romans 8:28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And the first 11 chapters of this book are just a beautiful picture of what God has done for us and everything he's put in order for our salvation. And as grateful as we are, as we've been praying for physical healing and for protection here in this life, as wonderful as that is, the things that we've looked at in the first 11 chapters of this book far surpass that. Our spiritual well-being and protection of God is absolutely amazing. And so as he starts chapter 12, he says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, I urge you to act in a certain way because of what God has done for you. Because of all the preparations that God has put forth. By the mercies of God, King James says. You'll recall that chapter 11 ends talking about the mercy of God. So because of those mercies, or by those mercies, you've been enabled by him then to act in such a way. And that's where we are picking up here this morning. I want to call out to our brethren in the north. I see the Robertson household is checking in from north of the border, and a little further south from there, Mom and Dad are calling in as well from just up the road. So it's good to have you guys with us. Now, we are still on this topic in the 12th chapter about what the book is about. Chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, right? Where Paul said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's the power of God unto salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Gentile. And when we get around to verse 12, some would say, well, here's what you do to earn your salvation, or here's what you do to gain your salvation. But in context of this book, I think the picture that's being painted is more along the lines of how can you not strive for this kind of life? How can you not do everything you can to be more like Christ, to live a life that's grateful for those sacrifices, that's grateful for the wonderful things that have been done for you. On Wednesday nights, we're studying through 1 Peter, and Peter is using that analogy of being of the household of God, being the children of God. If we are proud of our family name, right, we don't want to do anything to mar it, to disgrace it. And that's greatly what is being written about here in the 12th chapter. So he kind of summarizes it in verses 1 and 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. So he says, give your life a sacrifice. We talked a little bit last week about the fact that the Old Testament's full of sacrifices. And Paul is relying on that language to help us to understand what our life is supposed to be about. This morning, we're going to talk about the kingdom a little bit as we start into the Sermon on the Mount. And the title of this morning's sermon is Sermon on the Mount. It's all about the kingdom. It's maybe easier for us, or it's a parallel help for us to imagine ourselves submitting to a king. What's a living sacrifice for? We see all these depictions on TV about movies where people commit themselves to the reign of a king. What's that mean? I'm going to obey you. I'm going to serve you. I'm going to do everything I can to live in service to you. I think it's an amazing thing that our great nation is protected by a voluntary army. Why are people willing to do that? Well, the concept is similar to what he's talking about, a living sacrifice. If we believe in something, we're willing to live for it. And to strive for it. When we declare Jesus our King, we're going to live in His way. Especially when we realize the opposition and what it brings about, which is maybe a little seed I'll plant that we'll come back to in the sermon of the opposing king. Good to have the Getzies with us. I keep saying they're from Patton. They go to the Cherry Tree congregation, but they have to rub in that it's sunny down there in Florida too. But it's probably, I had -1 when I got in my vehicle this morning. It's probably not -1 degree Fahrenheit in Florida. So I'm glad you guys are down there enjoying the well as Keith Book. It's good to be able to see you with us this morning. Thanks for joining us. So, a living sacrifice. In verse 2, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, that you may prove that which is acceptable and pleasing will of God, the perfect will of God. Christianity is about the change of a mindset. It's about renewing our mind and looking at things completely different. It's not just about modifying our conduct. So verses 3 through 8 then, there's a point that I didn't draw out as we looked at that, and I think it's so important because the imagery here is that we are all different, and yet we're serving this same purpose. And that's a difficult thing to do. He starts verse 3, for by grace given to me, I say to you, everyone ought not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think. The last couple weeks has really illustrated the fact that we operate as a body, right? We've had holes in our bodies. We've had a lot of members that have not been able to be with us. I was shocked this morning when I walked up and there was a bulletin at the top of the stairs. I said to Amanda, did Russ come over here and make bulletins yesterday? She says, yes, he did. I was surprised, even more surprised when I saw Ross here, right? When our members are missing, we miss things. But this passage is not really talking about corporate worship, is it? You see, a lot of times I think we get tied up in this concept of organized religion where we think these assemblies are what we're about. And that's our purpose, and that's our goal, and that's what we're supposed to be doing, is having these public worship services, which are talked about and shown in Scripture, but they're not the focus of the book, are they? It illustrates, though, that when people are missing from their duty, things don't go as smoothly. Things don't go as well, right? Well, imagine if we think about our mission in life. And we have members missing. We aren't going to accomplish our goals near as well. It takes everyone working together. Now, imagine a part of our body works against us. Amanda and I were skiing. We took Anna skiing Friday. There are times when I'm skiing, this happens other ways in life too, when I want to do something, one of my legs doesn't cooperate. And things go bad in a hurry, right? Such is the case with Christ. It's bad enough to have someone not fulfilling their mission, but now when we start working against ourselves, it's even harder, isn't it? It's worse. We wreck. I thought this point was worth bringing out. COVID has put everything under stress, right? And what it's highlighted in part is that we view things differently. And we see solutions to problems differently. What's really interesting to me is see how often we differ from moment to moment. So oftentimes people will take a stance and say, here's how it is, here's what I think, and then a loved one gets seriously ill or passes away, their view is completely different all of a sudden. Here's my point, though. We're going to see things differently. Our role throughout this is going to be different from one another. But we can't fight against each other and be productive for serving Christ. How often have you seen public discourses, and I saw this kind of dialogue, just ripping at the hearts of churches, where people are saying, if you assemble, you're irresponsible and unloving towards people. Now, on the other side, people are saying, if you don't assemble, you're fearful and unfaithful. Is either of those stances helpful? No. They're both harmful. Now, what's interesting is I can refrain from assembling in person if I have concerns, right? Especially now that we have technology to help through that. And I can assemble in person and be encouraging. Either position I'm on, I can be encouraging and help the cause of Christ. Paul says, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. I think I have all the answers till I really look at my life, right? The things I actually have control of. Right? It's easy to tell the president and the governor and the congressmen and the senators what they need to be doing. Right? Those people are so dumb. What's the matter with them? Because that's not where I have control. Look at my life, though. What I have control of isn't perfect. So if I can't control this little circle and be perfect, how would I control a bigger circle and be perfect? I think that's part of what, or it's an application of what Paul is getting at, is don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. Rather, be grateful for the grace that's been given to you. Be fortunate for your part of the work, and make sure that you are serving the purpose, your gifts, your talents, your resources, although they differ from one another, are being used to build up the body. Questions or comments? It's interesting that that's the first concept he uses. Being different from one another and yet being united in the same purpose. After he says, don't be like the world. Because the world is full of us and theys. Right? That's all it does is divide and tear down. The first example Paul uses is don't be like, after he says, be renewed by your mind. Leave that mindset behind. Take advantage of what you do and do it well. All right, let's read 9 through 21, which there's this chapter. What's another name for this chapter, by the way?
Little Bible.
Little Bible. And the reason for that is, man, it covers a variety, doesn't it? So when we read 9 through 21, we're going to see a lot of information here. So we'll start coming back through it piece by piece then. Would someone go ahead and read that for us?
Let love be genuine. Reward what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty. Be associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
Thank you, Russ. And Russ, in about 45 seconds or so there, read a lifetime's worth of effort, right? Let your love be genuine. What does that mean? When the Bible uses the word love, is it talking about an emotion?
Fake love, you know.
Uh-huh. So the King James uses the word dissimulation there, right? Let your love be without dissimulation. So you're saying hypocrisy or fake?
Right.
Okay, absolutely. So ESV says, let your love be genuine. Bob is saying that means it's not fake, and that's dissimulation is not a word that I've used other than reading Romans 12 in my life recently. So the word means fakeness, right? Let be, or the positive side of that, let be genuine. Don't let be fake. Well, here's what's interesting, and one of the questions before us is is love of the Bible emotion. And while there's a number of different Greek words used for love, and by the way, it's interesting about language. You know, the Eskimos have, it's either 9 or 12 different words for love. Or, excuse me, snow. Snow. I don't know how many words they have for love. What does that tell us about snow in their lives? It's important and common, right? Isn't it interesting? In English, we really have one word for love. And the most prevailing concept is this emotion. Do I feel warm and fuzzy towards you? Right? But the Greek, there's emotion involved with all of them, but the Greek words are not primarily defined by emotion. They're defined by relationships and how we act towards one another. Right? Let your love be genuine. How often do we say, well, I don't like that person. I'm not saying how often do we say, how do we hear, we probably do think this way. I don't like that person, and I'm not fake, so I can't fake it. Heard that? You ever faked liking someone, Tammy? Back in the day? Do you ever fake liking Mike? That's a positive. We see that as a negative in our society, don't we? If I don't like you, I'm not going to be fake. I'm not going to lie about it. We'd say, well, that would be a disgenuine love. It would be a fake love. But we're talking about emotion, aren't we? What Paul's talking about is let our actions towards one another be genuine. In other words, don't say to Mike, I love you, and then kick him in that sore spot in the leg, right? That would be fake. The words were fake. It's following through with action towards one another. To be genuine, it's not just in word, it's in deed. Right? By the way, love is emotion, is self-centered, trying to say. Right? It's about how I feel. It's about how you make me feel. Think about that as we say that to and hear that said about spouses. Well, I just don't love you anymore. That's saying, I don't like the way you make me feel. You no longer gratify and make me feel well. That's the kind of love we're talking about. The genuine love, oh, here it is, Tammy, is being really nice to someone when we don't like it. That's love. Right? There's times when I know it's hard for you to believe that Amanda would like to choke me. And she still doesn't poison my food. That's love. Right? 4 points about love. And this is not original for me. You see these in 9, 10, and 11. This, I didn't write down where I got this, but I know it was someone much smarter and wiser than me. We see that love here is genuine, right? It's discriminative. We don't love everything, do we? What do we not love? Verse 9. Evil. Abhor that which is evil. This gets their idea of love. When things are seen in our life from a worldly prospect, whether something's good or not, comes down to typically whether it benefits me or not. In other words, Well, there's a lot of cheap products. They're made in China, right? All but use slave labor to build them. What do we buy? We'll say, oh, that's no good. That's wrong. That shouldn't happen. But are you willing to pay 4 or 5 times for the same product for something that wasn't built that way? Probably find a lot of other examples where we benefit from something that we say is wrong. Abhorring that which is evil means we detest evil, whether it's good for us or not. I want to plant that idea because it has a huge part in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus is dealing with. So love is discriminative, isn't it? It hates evil. Love is aggressive. Do not be slothful in zeal. King James uses the word business, I believe, here. But the idea is, that's later. Oh yeah, there it is. Not slothful in business, not slothful in zeal. Our work for the Lord, right? The business of the Lord.
Verse 11 there.
Yes.
So your love to the Lord should be true and faithful to his will and to doing what he wants you to do.
Yes. Our action in the Lord. One of the Beatitudes is, blessed is he who hungers and thirsts after righteousness. Hunger, when we hunger for something, how do we act? Sometimes I preach way longer than I'm supposed to, and some of you get hungry. And Pace, once your stomach growls, what do you hear? Stomach? Anything after that? No. Blah, 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 blah. I'm hungry. Oh, boy. Wonder how that prime rib is doing in the oven, right? Hunger's a motivator, isn't it? Everything else happens. I had the first bad experience at Chick-fil-A yesterday. Chris and I were going to Moundsville. It's 20 till 1. I got off. It took us an hour to get our food. And there were some other things involved with Chick-fil-A had their doors locked, and I drank Coke the whole way along the way. So I had to go across the Cabela's so that was involved in the hour. I don't want to let on I was at Chick-fil-A the whole, but came back in the line so slow, which I've never experienced at Chick-fil-A. And then they said, no, your items are done yet. Can you pull around front? So we sat there, and we sat there, and we sat there. My blood sugar was dropping. It was beyond low, probably because I drank all that Coke and then my insulin. Yeah. So I was getting motivated. Not in a good way, right? And there wasn't anything else I was thinking about in those moments. Isn't it interesting? We get motivated by things we care about. When Jace is here, he oftentimes is carrying something around. Rip it away from him and see if there's any motivation that comes out of that, right? It's interesting to me when it comes to work of Christ that oftentimes things go undone, right? At the rebuilding of the temple, after years and years, at first, it started with great vigor. And then all of a sudden, people leave and they're building their own houses. In God's house, the temple is crumbling. Our love is to be aggressive towards God. It's something we should be prepared for, motivated for, and strive to endeavor. There's so many ways we can do that, right? So many different avenues, is the prior passage brought up. Aggressive. Questions or comments? If we serve the Lord with hunger, things will get done, right? And in 11, that last part, it's directional. Our love is intentional or directional, right? Serve the Lord. It's focused in what we do. Building upon that, rejoice in hope. I talking to a Christian about this the other day, and it's no secret. I don't watch much news, and now it's got to the point where I don't turn on, especially any of the 24-hour news network. And it's hard. I walk away from conversations, the political conversation. When's the last time someone's heard a positive political conversation? Anyone remember one? It's been a long time, right? And what are people engaged? Oh, it's so terrible. Oh, we're consumed with negative. Christian told me last night. We're getting home, and it's 15-year-old, almost 16. Dad, I'm really concerned. Now, don't get me wrong. I am too. I'm concerned about being concerned. We should be concerned. But you know what I told Christian? We're exiles, man. We're strangers here. We're just passing through. We're going to have an influence. We're preparing to help people. He was talking about all the transgender people don't know what sex they are. They don't think there is anything such as gender. He says, Dad, where are we going? I said, I can tell you where we're going. We're going to a lot of broken lives, Christian. And as Christians, we aren't getting wrapped up in that. We're preparing to help people on the backside of it. In other words, rejoice in hope. We have an expectation. We have something beyond all of this. Focus on what we can do. The influence and the help that we have for people. Rejoice in hope. Could that be our focus for the next week as Christians? That's a challenge I have for you. It's a challenge I've been employing in my life. Rejoice in hope this week. When negativity comes about, rejoice in hope. Cling to that what's good. Find that which we can expect. Earnest expectation and help. Patient in tribulation. Now, are those not contrary to one another? No, they're not contrary. They mean the same thing. We are patient in troubles and rejoicing in our hope. The two are hand in hand. We can't do one without the other, I don't believe. And lastly, constant in prayer. Is there anyone here that feels they pray enough? They shouldn't be more constant in prayer? I think that's the biggest downfall of my life that I just can't get past, right? I need to pray more, should pray more. Rejoice in hope, patient in tribulation, and constant in prayer. Thank you.